From the deepest, darkest depths of the cave, he can peer out and he sees it. He sees that little light at the end of the tunnel, but the light feels so far away. It's not because it's actually that far away, but it feels that way. He's in the depth of the cave and he feels trapped. Now, he's not trapped by chains that hold his hands and feet. He's not trapped by a guard who's there to make sure he can't get out. He feels trapped by the darkness. The darkness weighs down on his mind so much that he can't think straight. It weighs on his heart so much that he's overwhelmed and he can't even take a full because it's so oppressive. The darkness is so strong that he can't even turn back one chapter before where he realized that he was not just in a cave, where one chapter before he was on the top of a mountain, but not just any mountain. He was on a mountain where he acted on behalf of God, and there was a victory over 400 prophets of a false god. He can't even think that far back because all he can see is the darkness in front of him. The light has been overshadowed, not by the literal darkness, but by the darkness that has overwhelmed his head, his heart. And there he is, a prophet of God, someone who knows God, who speaks for God, who's seen God do miracles. And in that moment, he prays this prayer: God, I'm alone. Will you end my life? And as you read this story, maybe you think, oh my gosh, how could this ever happen to someone, especially a prophet? Some of you hear it differently. Some of you hear that story and says, whoa, that comes way too close to home. Because while it wasn't a cave, it was dark, and I've wondered. Didn't say it out loud, but I've been there. Or your heart goes to someone who you do know who's been in that type of darkness. And now you're wondering, did they pray that prayer? They couldn't have, but if Elijah, this great prophet, had one prayer left to pray and it was end it, what do we do when we're overwhelmed by the darkness? What happens even when you see into the light, you know that outside that light, there's such great darkness because there's a king and a queen who've teamed up and they've put a bounty on your head and they want to kill you. And you're alone. Or at least you feel alone, but you don't know if you are or not. So the only thing you have to do is say, God, I'm alone. Will you end my life? God wants you to pray any sort of prayer. He says God's favorite prayers are your most honest prayers. But how God responds to this prayer may surprise you. Now, some of you are already surprised. How did a prophet find himself here? Oh, we'll tell that story. But the coolest part is not how he found himself there. The coolest part of the story is how God responds to those who are in that overwhelming darkness of depression, or even worse. And what we're going to see in this story is not a hero of faith who has great faith. What we're going to see is a hero and how God is the true hero of the story. And I hope that when you see how God responds to people then, you realize that's how he responds to people now. It's how he responds to you when you're there. It's how he responds to those closest to you. It's how he's going to respond in that moment where you show up for that person who you never realized was in that type of cave in their life. And God is going to show up that way. And what you're going to see is how God shows up and cares. And I hope what it does is make your heart go, wow. And that's the story that we're at. And if you have your Bibles, you can go to 1 Kings chapter 19. Little backstory here, the prophet we're talking about, his name's Elijah. He's considered one of the two greatest prophets in the Old Testament. Elijah and Moses, Eli and Momo, two greatest prophets. And here's this dude, and just a chapter before, again, go home and read it. We're in chapter 19 of 1 Kings, but in chapter 18, it was amazing. Chapter 18 is like a Royal Rumble. WrestleMania 30 had nothing on this one. It was, okay, no WrestleMania fans here. Okay, not gonna use that one. Where there was this rumble in the jungle. It was one prophet, Yahweh, of the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Again, that where Elijah came in, and he's against 400 prophets of Baal and another 450 prophets of Asherah. And what they do is they have this competition. They put this bowl there, and they say, whichever God lights it on fire is the one true God. And so the prophets of Baal and Asherah, they go first. They do their songs. They do their sacrifices. They even cut themselves to show their allegiance to their God, and nothing happens. And Elijah, like a total G, just goes like this. He says, hey, is your God going to the bathroom? 1 on 850. And while they do all this, then nothing happens, and Elijah goes, hey, just for good measure, let's put water on it. And he just prays. He says, God, we light it on fire. And every junior high boy's dream comes true. There's fire right there. And all of a sudden, there's revival that happens. God, Yahweh, the one true God, shows that he is the one and only God. All the other gods, or all the other false prophets are banished, killed. And now there's revival throughout all of the land. People have seen the power of the one true God on this mountain until Ahab, the king, tells his wife Jezebel. Now, Jezebel was a foreigner, which isn't the problem. The problem is that she worshiped these other gods. And Ahab, even though he's supposed to be the king of the one true God, he submits himself to this wife and worships her gods. And in that, she gets upset, and see what she does. And this is what chases Elijah into the cave. This is where we pick up our story. 1 Kings 19. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me ever so severely if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. It's like a mob boss shot caller kind of stuff. She puts a price out on Elijah's life, and she is the most powerful human there. Well, you're like, she's not the king. Yeah, but she's running the kings. You know what I mean? She's wearing the pants in this relationship, all right? And so what is Elijah, who just a chapter before had all the confidence in the world, literally talking trash? See how this man responds. Verse 3. We're going to read 3 through 13. Stick with me here. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. While he went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, Elijah said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up, eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up, eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up, ate, drank, and strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into the cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him saying, what are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I have been zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant and tore down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left. Now they are trying to kill me too. Verse 11, the Lord said, go stand out in the mountain in the presence of the Lord. The Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the rocks apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled the cloak over his face, went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. When a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Oh, man. One chapter after his greatest moment, greatest highlight has become his greatest lowlight. And before we look at how Elijah responds to God, which I think may surprise you, I just want to look at how God responds to Elijah. When he's like, hey, I'm the only one. When he says, hey, take my life, what does God do? God shows up and speaks, not once, twice, thrice, fourth, but 5 times. I love that God is willing not to just give it one time, but in verse 5, in verse 7, in verse 9, in verse 11, and in verse 13 again, 5 different times he reaches out and tries to initiate a conversation with him. This God doesn't give up. And it's also interesting what he asks. Twice he asked this question, Elijah, what are you doing here? Oh man, I love when God asks questions. Remember the very first time he asked a question in Scripture? Some of you know this story. It's the very beginning after Adam and Eve have sinned. And God says to Adam, hey, what are you guys doing? Like God doesn't know. It's like this. It's like in my house when my kids go and ask my wife, hey, can we have more screen time? And she asks this question, how much screen time have you had? Like she doesn't know. She's got an app right there that can tell them down to the minute. And they'd be like, ah. And here's the thing, she could say, you've already been over your 60-minute allotment. I gave you 5 extra minutes, and not because I wanted to, but because I just needed 5 more minutes for mama time. But I'm not going to tell you you're already over. Why does she ask? Because she's trying to affirm the relationship. Take them seriously. You're a human being. Why don't you stop? Why don't you think? Why don't you ponder? And maybe in that moment, they'll realize, oh, mom is not just some authority that's bringing the hammer, but there's some respect. Because they earned it, the high score on the video game didn't earn it. It's because they're the kids. And maybe thinking about it will get them out of this like, hyper, I just want more. And maybe having a conversation back and forth. And it usually doesn't work, but at least you tried. Good job, love. It's the same thing God does with us. He says, hey, are you willing to have a conversation? Because what God wants more than the outcome is you, your heart, your trust, your relationship. And sort of just saying, hey, here's what you do, go do it. It says, hey, I'm God, just trust me. He dignifies us with a conversation. This God's different. Remember the other God before? They were cutting themselves, trying to show that how worthy they were, how devoted they were, and they did everything, every sacrifice. That's what religion does. Religion tries to show to God how faithful you are and hope that God blesses you. In Christianity, it's different. It's not about us showing our goodness to God. It's about God showing his goodness to us. These prophets of Baal cut themselves, and their God does nothing. Whereas if you skip forward a couple hundred years after this, a little over 1,000, it's the God of the universe who himself will send his son to be cut on the cross to show his love and his commitment to you. But he doesn't just stop with 5 conversations. He doesn't just stop with 2 questions. What does he do next? He says, hey, have some food and a drink. Water, just so you know. Hey, there's lots in the Bible about alcohol, some good, some not so good. But in this moment where he's depressed, he's like, no. Let's stay away from the hard stuff. Let's just have a jar of water. And by the way, I've baked you some bread. Well, maybe the bread was just there. No, the bread wasn't just there. Where he is, he's in this remote desert. He's by this broom bush. A broom bush is like the most pathetic bush you've ever seen. And any sort of fire there is a fire hazard. And anyone who's been in California long enough, like, you do not want fire in this type of desert. And he's all alone, but somehow it's there. What miracle does God do? The angel's cool, don't get me wrong, I love that. But what does he do? God shows up and says, you just need a snack, because maybe you're getting hangry. And maybe you can't think straight because you haven't had any blood sugar yet. Like, this seems crazy. No, this is it. This is the God who amazes me so much. He loves every single part of you so much. He even loves your body to a point where he says, I'm going to care for every part of you, your mind, your heart, and even what I'm going to do is make sure that you've got some good food to eat. Friends, sometimes God isn't as spiritual as we are. Sometimes God's answer is you need to take a nap, you need to have a snack, you need to go on a run. Sometimes he says, hey, the way you care for your body, sometimes you're in such a dark place, let's try some medicine to see if that's going to help you get there. Because God doesn't just care for your quote-unquote spirit. He cares about every single part of you and all of who you are. Your mind, your emotion, your body, your spirit, your relationships are so intertwined, and God cares about the whole part of you. And here he is baking bread for Elijah. That doesn't seem that spiritual. But then what does he do next? What does he do next to show him? He then does this thing. There's this shock and awe. He says, go out to the end of the cave. Okay, he goes out to the end of the cave. And then all of a sudden, there's this loud wind. But God's not in the wind. Huh. There's an earthquake. I don't know if it's 8.0 like the one in Russia, but all of a sudden, God's not in it. And then there's a fire. I like fire, cool. God's not in it. It says, where is God? It says, God is in a gentle whisper. But this word gentle whisper, it's the coolest word I learned about it. I want to show you about it. Go to this slide, it talks about the gentle whisper. Go next. It's this Hebrew word demaha. Get this, I love this first definition, a voice of sheer silence. How is there a voice of sheer silence? I don't know how that works. I remember when I was a freshman in college, I went to a Bible college because I was studying to be a pastor. And I remember the first question I ever asked in Bible college. We were reading through the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and it said that God spoke. And I asked my raised man, hey, professor, excuse me, when it says God spoke, what does that mean? Is it like audible? It's like James Earl Jones, you know? Like, is it through an angel or what is it? And here I am, my very first question. I'm so excited because I've got someone who's got a PhD in Bible to answer this question. And I said, how does God speak? Is it verbal? Is it not verbal? He goes this, and I'll never forget his answer. He said, and I quote, I'm like, I'm paying $530 a unit. Yo, the junior college at that time was like $10 a unit. I'm spending $500 a unit. This is a 3-unit course, and for $1,500 I get a, I want my money back. But it's interesting. This is how he speaks in a voice of sheer silence. It's a thin stillness. Demaha doesn't mean quiet like whisper. It means total stillness. A silence that can be felt. The kind of silence that stops everything and demands attention. This silence or this demaha sounds like it's the silence that causes you to lean in. And as we're in this series, Rooted in Peace, it's interesting. We're talking about the shock and the silence of it and the two-edged nature of both of them. But let me just tell you, friends, in my experience, the number one way God speaks, most common, most powerful, most clear, is through his scriptures. That's why for over 2,000, you're looking at over 3,000 years, people of faith have gathered around this, and it doesn't matter what language it's been translated into, people hear God through this, number one. But the second way, it kind of goes back and forth from my experience, it's through that demaha, that silent, still voice, and through God's people seem to be the other two ways that God seems to speak the most. So why this way? Why start with the shock and the awe? Let's talk about the shocking things first, and we'll come back to the silence just a second. It's interesting that God first sends the wind, then he sends the earthquake, then he sends the fire. Why would he do that first? I think what God is trying to do, and I'm just hypothesizing here, I think God is trying to shock him into his right mind. I think he's so overwhelmed that what he can't do is see outside of himself. It's that moment where I can't get out of bed, I can't think straight, I'm so overwhelmed by it, and then all of a sudden, it's like you take a cold shower and whoa, okay, I'm awake, I can see again. I think that's what God is doing, is shocking him into his senses. But I also think it's a reminder to us. There's another side to the shocking thing, that our lives become overwhelmed by noise, and we can't confuse the noise with God. I don't know if it's just you, but my life becomes overwhelmed by the noise of scrolling, of news feeds, of text messages, of what other people need, of world events, all of those things. And what happens is sometimes those things distract me, and I think that I need to put my attention there for some reason. And I think for some reason I go to, whether it be social or the news or to people for my news feed, and instead of going to him. And in this moment, let me just say this. God is inviting you to not pay attention to all the salacious things that's trying to grab your attention. In those moments, I'll I'll bet you 20% of you, when you walk in the office or wherever it is, or you walk to your home office there, 20% of you, by the time before you sit down at your desk, before you get to your spot, there's gonna be someone who runs up to you, oh, there's a house on fire. You haven't even started your job. Hey, did you respond to that email? Hey, did you know this person didn't show up today? And you're like, whoa. And in that moment, what's going to want to happen is all of your energy is going to want to go to whatever that big present thing is. And what God may just say is, I'm not in that. Whisper and silence. So there's a saying, no to the distractions that God may be inviting you into. But there's also this piece that says, if you're not able to hear him, he may shock you into it, not because it's a punishment, but he knows that's what you need. Sometimes for me, when I'm at that point of crankiness, nothing I do, I'm like, I just need to literally go and take a cold shower and chill out because it's Roseville and I don't have a pool and I'm getting cranky, and no matter what I say, all I want to do is yell at my kids, not because they did anything crazy, and it's a me thing, and I just need to be shocked into it a little bit. So there's this shock and awe thing happening. So then when God gets your attention, he brings you to this silence because he wants to speak to you. But I want to warn you, warn is too strong. Warn says you need to be afraid. But let me try it this way. I want to make you aware of this double-edged nature of silence. Silence, again, becomes one of the primary ways in which God speaks to you, but also the enemy knows the power of silence, and in that silence sometimes is when the enemy will try and creep in. It's that silence that makes you think, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Or what should I be doing? It's a time where you send a message to someone you love and care about, hey, just checking in, seeing how we're doing. We had a hard conversation the other day, and their silence, not responding, or even worse, when you get the ... and then it goes away. Some of y'all, those of you with green text messages don't know what I'm talking about. We'll have an altar call for you later to convert. And in that silence, what happens is then all of a sudden your brain starts, what if I did something? What if I didn't do something? What's wrong? What's blah, 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 blah. And that's where Elijah gets, right? The silence becomes deafening. And Elijah put himself in a vulnerable place. Why? Because he traveled with someone, but then he left a friend behind. And now he's completely and totally all alone. And I wonder if he had brought his servant with him, if maybe, just maybe, his servant would be like, are you okay, dude? Maybe his servant would be like, hey, here's some crackers, I wonder what happened, but he put himself in a vulnerable position, and in that silence can become overwhelming. And sometimes there's that voice you need to learn how to say, shh. The voice of the lies that tell you you're not good enough, could've, would've, should've. When you hear a voice in your head and the word should is in that voice, you need to tell that shh to shut up. Because let me tell you, in my experience, it's the enemy, it's not God. It's the enemy who wants to shit on you. All right, half of you got that, okay. Ooh. Y'all, I've been gone for 2 weeks. I'm like, where have you been? Come on. The shock can distract you or recenter you. The silence can be the place in which the enemy crawls in. It can also be the place that allows you to hear God. And let me just tell you, friends, in my experience, it's this practice of silence before the day gets started, before I turn on my cell phone, before I do all those things, when I'm able to have those moments. And for me, this is what it looks like for me. I set a 5-minute timer on my phone. I put my phone in the other room because I love that thing. It's my precious. Put it in the other room and sit there. And in that moment, just thoughts come, just let them pass by. Pay attention. Oh, that's interesting. And when the silence is enough, maybe just a little prayer. Maybe it's, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Maybe it's, God, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Root me in your peace. I'm feeling overwhelmed. God, root me in your peace. Not because saying it over and over again is somehow some magical formula or incantation that makes it work, but what you're doing is you're trying to learn how to sit in that silence. And let me tell you, the beautiful thing of this is sometimes in those moments, God, through his grace, not always, but when God chooses to and he speaks in that calm, centered, that demaha voice. It's amazing. And he doesn't always. Actually, in my experience, he usually doesn't. But here's the craziest thing about this that I want you to know. When I start my day by practicing it, my ability to hear the demaha later in the chaos is so much better. It's like in the morning, it was batting practice, and I was just warming up my muscles of learning how not to be an anxious, reactive person and learning how just to do it. And then in the next day, when someone yells in for my attention, when there's something going on, I'm like, oh, Kyle, you got to do something. No, I don't. This is how God wants to root you in peace. He wants to say, I see you and every part of you, and I will respond to you, emotionally, physically, all those things. I will shock you to get your attention. I will warn you of the shocking and the silence that may distract you, but I invite you to the demaha, the silence that you can hear. And this is where God will root you in peace. And no matter what's going on around you, you will be able to hear him more clearly than ever. And to that grace of a God who shows up, speaks 5 times, asks 2 questions, cooks him breakfast, tells him, hey, let's get moving. We got somewhere to go. I love how Elijah responds to God's grace and care for him. Look at how Elijah responds. Verse 14. God, thank you for your grace, your faithfulness, and your patience. Because I have heard your gentle whisper, I will trust and I will follow all the days of my life. Where you send me, I will go. Oh, sorry, that's not your translation? Oh, some of y'all who are actually reading along, actually that's not how Elijah, the amazing prophet of God, responds. Get this. He literally, it's like you pull the cord and he repeats the same line from a few earlier. He literally says word for word what he said earlier. I love this. This is how he responds to the demaha. Listen to this. Lord, I have been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They have torn down your altars. They have put your prophets to the sword. I am the only one left, and they are going to kill me too. How does God respond to this? I don't know. I don't know. I've always wondered, does God ever just go, oh. Maybe he doesn't because he knows it's going to happen. Maybe he's like a human, that's the thing, God shows up and he takes on these human characteristics so that we can actually see him and understand him. But in those moments, I want to view I have one, again, I don't know if this is true again, one of the mysteries of God that we try to understand is God is one, but God is 3. In the Trinity, there's the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and together they are one God in 3 persons. It's a mystery, and however you explain it, it doesn't totally make sense, but it's beautiful, and it's mysterious, and you don't have to understand everything, and that's great. But sometimes in this moment, I ever wonder if the Father, the Son, and the Spirit have put some money on it, and they're like, Jesus, pay up. Son, I told you he was going to do it. And it's always the young ones no. The young one's optimistic, right? It's Jesus who's like, no, he's going to get it this time. He's going to get it this time. And he's like, I don't know. Maybe that's why, okay, that's a bad joke. We're going to end. We're going to go. That almost got real bad, real dark. Okay, so here we go. So what does Elijah do? He literally repeats the same, I think the theological word before was BS. And instead of God, which I would want to do, or which is what I would want to do. I love that God doesn't reason with the unreasonable. He just says this. This is how God responds. This is so cool. Spoken 5 times, done all these things. And then verse 15, the Lord came to him. Go back the way you came. Go back to the desert of Damascus. When you get that, anoint Hazael over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, over Israel. And appoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escaped the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death anyone who escapes the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and those whose mouths have not kissed him. Some of y'all reading along, y'all need to circle, underline, highlight that 7,000. So, I don't know about this. I wonder if God's like, I know you think you're alone, but there's 7,000 others, and you've just missed it. Why? Because you've been so overwhelmed by the darkness. And instead of blaming and shaming him, he just says, hey, I get it. You feel alone. Let me just show you you're not alone. So I'm going to go send you to these folks. And if you look at who he sends, man, you just get lost in those names, right? Can't pronounce them, don't know where they are. And there's this one you'll easily go over. The first one he mentions, it didn't make sense to me. He said the king of Aram. Like, why would a Hebrew prophet, an Israelite prophet, anoint a king of a different nation? Aram is essentially modern-day Damascus. They're actually like mostly in conflict with them most of the time. Why would God do that? God is essentially saying this is some gangster stuff. He says, I know you feel like you are so alone and there's no hope, but let me just tell you how big and powerful I am. You may not have let me in the cave to speak to you, to transform you, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross cultural lines, border lines, language lines, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that foreign king that you say is evil. I am so sovereign and in control of all things. I'm going to go to this guy who you would have thought was nothing but an enemy, and I'm going to use him. That's how powerful I am. And I know you're afraid of Jezebel, but then I'm going to anoint Jehu, and Jehu's going to stand up to him. And if Jehu doesn't do it, and then Elisha's going to do it. And then if Elisha doesn't do it, I got 7,000 more. So one, you're not alone. And instead of trying to convince you, I'm just going to show you. That is gracious. But it also says this, and this is something you got to get. Friends, when we are in those deepest, darkest places, one of the worst things we can be is alone. Let me just tell you, I don't know. Early in the story, it says that he leaves his servant behind. Maybe he leaves him behind for good reason. Maybe he's like, I just want to have an alone time with God, maybe. But also maybe he wants to be alone because he can't face him, because he's supposed to be the big, powerful man of God, and he's so ashamed that he's not, and he doesn't want his servant to see him hurting and suffering this way. Friends, let me tell you, sometimes God isn't as spiritual. Sometimes it will be an angel. It will be a miraculous voice. But sometimes it's a nap. Sometimes it's a snack. Sometimes it's a bottle of water. And sometimes God's like, I'm just going to surround you with other people so that you don't got to be alone in this. Loneliness is a danger. And a little preview here. In about a month, we're going to launch a new sermon series. And we're going to put together some small groups. And I'll just tell you, you need to be in a small group. You've got to be connected to other Christians who can walk with you through the highs of life and the lows of life. Who, when you're in chapter 18, like Elijah, and life is awesome, they're like, woohoo! And when you're in chapter 19, they're like, we got you, bro. We're not going to leave you alone. We're going to remove all the sharp objects. And I know you want to be alone, but I'm just going to show up. Even if I'm just showing up via DoorDash, you will not be alone. You need those folks in your life. And there will be times where you need to be that for somebody else. And that's why we do small groups. It's because we hold the scriptures in one hand, we hold each other in the other hand, and together we know that that's how God cares for his people, through his word and through his people. So, as we step back from this, we started in a hopeless cave, and we end with this, not a transformation of Elijah, but a transformation of the situation, because God is bigger than Elijah's perspective. So in that, before we close, I want to ask this question. How might God be wanting to care for you in this moment? One of the reasons that's a hard question for me to ask is because I don't like it. I don't want God to care for me. I want to serve God. God, what can I do for you? God, you've been so good. God, how can I change the world? Uncle's like, how is God caring for you? I'm like, I'm fine. It's fine. Maybe God is speaking once, twice, thrice, 5 times. He's trying to speak and you're not listening. And in that, sometimes we just know that God will continue to speak, and sometimes he'll be like, all right, I'll step back and try and get your attention another way. I'm not going to force you. Maybe this morning he's saying, hey, don't be so spiritual. Go home after church and take a nap instead of do the laundry. That doesn't seem very spiritual. Yeah, but sometimes God's not as spiritual as we are. Maybe you're here in that loneliness, and what you realize is, okay, I've got to figure out how to be connected. I got to learn how to let people in. I got to learn how to trust some other folks. I got to learn how to do that. And God, bring me those people. But for everyone in this moment, I believe that God is inviting you into this moment of silence. I want to help you experience this demaha moment. So if you feel comfortable, I invite you just to maybe close your eyes, put your seat or sit back up against your seat, put your feet on the ground, and just take a big breath in through your nose and we're just going to spend 1 or 2 minutes in silence. But before that silence, let me just read this prayer and blessing over you. To prep us for this time of silence, let me just say it this way. When the devil whispers, "You are finished," God declares, "I'm not done with you yet." The devil tells you to run away, but God invites you to return and rest. The devil isolates you in a cave of despair, but God draws you near with a whisper of peace. The devil says your failure disqualifies you, but God says your story isn't over. The devil shows you fire and fear to paralyze you, but God speaks in stillness to heal you. The devil uproots you with exhaustion and lies, but God roots you in peace with his presence and truth. God, we invite you into this time of silence to speak if you wish to speak, to still our anxious hearts and minds, and teach us how to trust you more than we trust ourselves. God, by your grace, not only speak, but give us the ears and hearts to hear your silent voice.